You're listening to Distraction Therapy with Rob Watson. Conversations about how we find meaning in our lives and what it's like to be part of a meta-modern world. Hello, it's Saturday the 9th of April and I'm Rob Watson and this is a Distraction Therapy podcast and I'm joined again in a coffee shop in Leicester by Ryan Clayton. Hello, how's things?
Yeah, very good. Very low key at the moment, relaxing, just sort of churning things through, day by day. Nothing very interesting to depart, really.
Is that a good thing?
I think so. It's given me a lot of time to read, a lot of time to drink, and a lot of time to relax.
Yeah, it's been intense in many ways, and to drop out of the cycle of intensity and be a bit more reflexive. Have you been able to do that?
Yeah, I think so. I've been able to take a lot more time for myself and reflect. And like you say, I feel like the last couple of times we've done these podcasts, things have been very intense and almost like draining. I remember the conversation we had about Ukraine and I left and I was thinking, oh my God, am I going to go home and kill myself now? Maybe not.
Just imagine people listening to that conversation.
Well, yeah, exactly. I can't imagine anybody listening to me talk. Pity them all.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I always seem to be the person who ends up at a party in the kitchen having an intense conversation. I'm not the person who dances around and as kind of gay abandon or whatever, but it's like it's serious conversations with people. It's like I'm burdened by that.
Yeah, well, that was an interesting experience I had recently. I went out with some friends from work on a Friday, and we got very, 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 very drunk, and ended up back at one of my friends' places. I think there was about 5 of us there. And it just sort of very quickly devolved into, okay, there are now 2 bottles of Prosecco are gone. And just rambling about comic books and reciting Robert Frost poetry, talking about the existential meaning of the road not taken.
I thought you were about to say you were stacked up on Heidegger.
When am I not, Rob?
Well, quite. Who isn't? And so you are you? Because you're much more of an extrovert.
Well, I feel like people would describe me that way, but I never know where to place myself, because I do. There are moments of extroversion, to be sure, and I'm very comfortable being extroverted. But also, to be perfectly honest, I would much rather be spending my weekend sat alone in my room with myself and my thoughts, and that's very rejuvenating to me, to just sit there with a book.
That's interesting, because you can kind of be the life, you live a life of facilitating other people's activities, if you like, but that doesn't mean to say that you're an extrovert, because no. What you feel like at the end of a party, other than hungover, a busy session of something where you're interacting with lots of people, what's your desire then? Is it you can't wait for the next time you do it, or is it like I really need to go back and sit in my room quietly for a few hours?
To be honest, it's usually a bit of both. I've always found that notion, or that very harsh divide between introvert and extrovert, to be a bit simplistic and unfair, because after a long night. Thank you. Sorry, that was my coffee that I'm now going to add sugar to the next time I get a break in my train of thought. But it's like the last time, I woke up, and I don't really suffer from hangovers that badly, to be honest. I sort of woke up and I just wanted to take a bit of a walk around town. I was quite excited for the next time that we were going to do it. But when I got home, I very much just sat down and read, enjoyed the rest of my weekend.
Yeah, there isn't a clear dividing line between extroversion and introversion, as much as what you read online and what you see online is I just use it as the basis. You have a preference whether you're left-handed or right-handed, and you can do things. If you're left-handed, you can do things with your right hand that you can't do with your left hand, and vice versa. And that's kind of almost how we think about or how I think about introversion and extroversion. It's if you like a preference where you just find things easier.
Yeah.
And if you're not compelled to go out, meet with people, plan to meet up, and then engage in lots of social activities for the sake of the social activity, then you're probably more actually on the introvert side.
Yeah.
But you've just learnt to do those extrovert things. You can cope with them, you can manage them, and it changes. There's one thing about hangovers that changes. Until you're about 30, you can manage hangovers, and then all of a sudden you can't.
Yeah.
And that's the same with introversion and extroversion. If you're an introvert, you can manage an extroverted situation until you reach the point where you can no longer manage it. And it is, the hangover is a good analogy for that, I think.
Well, I've always found it more so to be a useful tool for some people when it comes to understanding yourself, which is ultimately one of the most difficult things to do, is essentially realise who you are. It's a very sort of simplistic shorthand to say, well, I like these things and I don't like these things, because people always feel a bit lost without a sense of self. Like if you were to get rid of that, I feel like people might be a bit more lost.
Well, it gets abused because they get diagnosed as being a type, which they then play to or rely on or use as an excuse for not doing other things. So it can be like anything. It can be misabused. It can be used out of context, and it can be used as a stick to beat people with and pigeonhole people and stereotype people. But the other side of it is it is actually quite liberating to understand that there are patterns of behaviour that emerge through your life that you can then suddenly put into a context and say, that's how I function, that's how I work, that's how I perceive and engage with the world, and this is where I'm most comfortable. The problem comes, I think, it's one of the differences between, in its broader sense, Eastern and Western culture, if you like, Chinese and American culture, is the vast difference about how introversion and extroversion is appreciated. America is an extremely extroverted nation. Everything's brash up front. You've got to project yourself. You've got that kind of, if you're not projecting your personality and persona at people in a way which wins the deal, then quietly sitting in the corner is like, well, that's not valued at all. So you understand why people who are not extroverted struggle in an overly extroverted society.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you bring up the example of an American, because I was on a train literally last night on my way back from Nottingham, and there was this obviously American girl on the train. You could tell from her grating accent, and she was talking I've never heard anybody talk so loud in a confined public space. And I don't think I heard her breathe for 30 minutes, but every sentence that she started began with the word I or contained it somewhere, and it was always this kind of sickening sense of confidence, and she knew who she was and what she was doing and what she liked to do. And it felt a bit defeatist to the idea that human beings can kind of be anything and do anything. Like, I've never enjoyed kind of limiting that freedom on yourself to change and adapt and to project yourself and define yourself however you see fit in any kind of given circumstance or situation.
But you question that? Yeah, that's probably in the school system, from what I've read about kind of school systems in America, it's the talks that you get, the commencement addresses at the graduation ceremonies. You can be anything you want to be if you just believe in yourself. And it's like, clearly it's not true. Mo Farah used to say this a lot, is not built to be a championship weightlifter, and neither is a championship weightlifter built to be a marathon runner. these things are finite and bounded, and it's kind of it's in a way it's not about this idea of kind of better versions of yourself and everything. Is this postmodern nonsense that we've discussed before? But the idea that actually there is something which defines your character. There is something inherent within your makeup, which means that you can do certain things well and you do certain things badly.
See, I'm quite suspicious of that idea. I don't know whether it's because my mind has been polluted by, reading a ton of existentialist and postmodern philosophy, but at least in the sense of I can see where you're coming from when you talk about the champion runner and the weightlifter, because those are very external and biological things where those factors play a massive role in your development and what you will be good and you won't be good at. But when it comes to...
Are you assuming that mental capacity is like a tabula rasa, that it's like kind of a blank slate, and that we all have the same mental capacities or psychological frameworks?
Not necessarily, no, because I think that might be going too far in the other direction. But what I'm saying is that perhaps the dispositions that develop as you grow up are perhaps more flexible than we sometimes give them credit for.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and that's the danger of typecasting and pigeonholing, is that what you end up doing is the flexibility that you need with the social relationships that you have. But we live in a very inflexible society and culture, which it constantly employs people. Employment practices are pretty much not about who is effective in a job. It's what are the types of people that we've employed in the past, and repeating that, process of employing those types of people, because that's what's said to be successful. And then what happens is some people come along who are disruptors to that, and they bring a different psychological type or archetypal role to that, which then disrupts that and changes the boundaries. So we're very conservative about and protective, and probably rightly so, that for the good order of society we want it to continue in a way which is not so disruptive. But the problem is that there's a whole load of cognitive psychological diversity out there which doesn't get a chance to find its feet and to learn how to be used. So the classic thing, I always used to hate any tutor or teacher who turns around to somebody who's kind of more disposed to be introverted to say, you need to be more outgoing. It's like, no, that's completely wrong. There's a famous, who's the guy? I can't remember his name. It's like before Galileo and Copernicus, who basically did the groundwork of the heliocentric view of the solar system, of the universe. And he did it from a prison cell because he was considered as mad. He didn't have any observational tools or techniques, and he was derided because of his ideas. And it was another generation. I'll have to look on Wikipedia to find out who it was. Comments in the comments below. Answers in the comments below. But
it's probably the most highbrow answers in the comments below.
Well, it's like Einstein. He wasn't an experimental physicist. He was a theoretical physicist. Newton was both an experimental and a theoretical physicist and an alchemist. And so when you think about those kind of boundaries that are placed around people's cognitive disposition, it's like, hang on a minute, you've got to pull back from that and say there's a whole variety there that have different functions and serve different purposes and produce different benefits. But if you get locked into thinking that there's only one kind of type of successful, and unfortunately that's the kind of model that we've got in our culture at the moment. I always kind of think that there's a grouping, if you like, between UK and American mindsets are very linked. They're seen as very aspirational in a way which European thinking is different.
So on a more practical level, how do you see that being changed? How do you see that that model that we're working with at the moment being adapted, expanded, or I suppose just necessarily fixed?
Explored, I think. Well, there's a lot of work going on. There's a lot of people talking about it. It's this idea of the mental health crisis at the moment. I think it's not a mental health crisis. It's a how would you describe it? The outcome is mental health crisis, but it's a social crisis of dogmatic, fixated ideas of what a good person should be, and how that is. So you kind of got to. I mean, first of all, the first thing you've got to learn is kind of be kind to yourself, and I mean, I know it sounds like a cliche. And often these things can kind of be pulled back into merely slogans and kind of cliches and sound bites and things. But the first thing we've got to learn is, and that was the first thing, kind of when I kind of started to look at this and realising that there's a pattern there of introversion, is actually stop beating yourself up about that and embrace it. Yeah. But you have to explain to people what difference that means and how it means that you respond. So the answer would be for people to just stop pushing at these things and to start listening and observing and then exploring that and looking at how, and stop being so prescriptive about what they think. So you look at large institutions and large organisations. To be successful in a large public institution or organisation, you've got to act in a particular way. You've got to address a certain type of behaviour. You've got to fit in with something, and when you don't feel like that's something you can do, you have to come up with an alternative strategy. And that's, I think, ironically, it's one of the things I think that's really interesting about podcasting, because it kind of creates and opens this extra space which you can express yourself in a different way, or through creative practice, through art, through fashion, through music. It's not just, they're the things which aren't so bounded by administrative routines and systems, those kind of things. So there are things that you can do, which is to reintegrate creative approaches which don't follow, or problem-solving approaches which don't follow the outcomes-based mindset, which doesn't produce the outcomes. Everybody gets really frustrated because an organisation wants to achieve certain outcomes, but it can't achieve those outcomes by trying to achieve those outcomes. That's the paradox.
And the problem also is, and I've experienced this a bit recently, is these sort of systems governed by professionalism, very outcome driven, are very what's the word I'm looking for? They struggle to integrate and to incorporate those more creative approaches to problems and to achieving those outcomes, which, like you say, are the things that are necessary. And it was interesting because I work in PR. We had somebody come in to deliver a workshop or to talk to us who was a journalist and who'd done some PR. And his talk was very much about that, is taking a more creative approach to these things, the use of humour, and sometimes, to achieve the goals you want, sometimes you almost have to be a little less professional and be a little more reflexive, be more humorous, and understand what it is that people look for in a news story. I think his name was Ian H, and I think he was the first guy to organise a flash mob in the UK. So he has some experience with, PR and getting people to pay attention to things. And it was very interesting to hear that, because it's something that I'd been struggling with for a while. You sort of end up churning yourself through the same systems over and over again, like, okay, well, I've got to do this, and to do that I need to do this, this and this, and everything becomes the same and sort of blurs into a grey paste of very uninteresting, headlines and stories that are always the same. And I'm always amazed when any of them get picked up by any journalists. And then I started sort of pushing back a bit more and saying, well, no, what if we do this? It's not necessarily what we always do, but it's creative and it's fun. Oh, yeah, but it's not very professional, is it? They won't like that. But it will achieve the end.
Yeah.
Which is what you want.
Yeah, and that's the distinction, is kind of what if you're, when you get that pushback, you get that kind of, ooh, you know, why do you want to be doing that? Because that's not about the task at hand in terms of, to use a phrase, capturing people's attention for something that you produce, that people read or listen to or whatever it is. It's really about being seen to follow the routines that have been established, and it's about saying, this is the repertoire of activities that we have available to us, which, to be a good employee, you have to show how proficient you are at churning things through in that repertoire, mechanically. And then at some point somebody comes along. So this is why companies fail, and this is why they get, you know, kind of bought out, and this is why other people come along and suddenly transform it, because they do things like flash mobs, and they say, hang on a minute, there's a really old, you know, I mean, I'm ironically, I have two sides to how I think about stuff. I absolutely am reliant on the system and the process. A good ordered system and process, if it's simple and if it isn't being used and developed purely for its own terms, to say, we've got a good process, let's keep managing this good process, should provide a platform for you to do creative stuff and interesting stuff.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, most people don't see it like that. What most people, in my experience, do is they just stick to managing the process efficiently.
Yeah. Well, because for a good system to work, necessarily there has to be space within that system for you to still work towards the same end, but also, like you say, sort of creatively go on tangents that will eventually reach the same goal. But often these systems become narrower and narrower and narrower when they realise what works, up until the point where they no longer work, because all you're doing is the same thing over and over again. And it's almost like, you know, not using the muscles in your body and only doing the same thing every day. Eventually that muscle's going to atrophy, and then, you know, you find yourself having to chop off your own arm.
Yeah.
It doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, and you're bedbound, and you know, it's and I don't know, I mean, am I oversensitive to this? But, you know, am I part of the problem? Am I locked into a kind of culture which is a very what's the word I'm looking for? I was going to say recursive. I don't know if that's the right word, but kind of constantly kind of looks in on itself, and is like so focused on examining the process of activity and what defines that activity. That what we do is we don't look beyond that, and we're not thinking ahead, and we're not looking forward, and we're not saying what are the changes that we need to anticipate, what's coming along, because that's the one thing that we can guarantee, is that everything changes, and that there is the stasis idea that we live in a kind of perpetual, one day you wake up and you suddenly realise that you're no longer. I think I'll put it this way: I've come to the realisation that I'm a washed up old fart. And, you know, it's kind of quite liberating to now be in that position to say, okay, well, that's a different, because you're at the beginning of your career. I'm at kind of getting closer towards the end of whatever kind of career I can muster together in the last few years that I can make pay. But at the same time, it's like kind of. It's like I look at people and think I don't need to be seen to be jumping through those hoops anymore. Yeah. And there's a great phrase I read, which was in this book, this Richard North book I'm reading about Coleridge, and he's in this very desperate position, and he's confined for like 9-10 months to he's kind of been weaned off his opium addiction. This is near Bath, and he's just completely isolated. He's had this great success. He had a play put on in London. It generated lots of money, and it just got caught up in other projects, kind of crashed and burnt, and he ended up it's the darkest period of his life. And this phrase was written in it, and it kind of says, when you're in a situation where you haven't got many opportunities coming your way, you have to dig deep. and find that which is within that is going to then allow you to move forward. I thought that's a great way of thinking about it. Where we often think of the where are the opportunities coming from? What's the chance for us to do different things and to live a well balanced, meaningful kind of life with kind of social engagement and social reciprocation and those kind of things. Well, what if you don't live in that world?
Yeah.
Where you don't walk into environments and situations and groups where you feel welcome or you feel as if you can participate. What if you're not in that situation? What if it is the system is against you and the system is pushing down and pushing back against you? Well, if there aren't the opportunities there, what do? Now, you can either just rage and blame, which is a perfectly understandable response, and feel like that most of the time yourself, or you have to look at yourself and you have to dig deep and you have to dig inwards and you have to find that thing that is going to move you forward, that kind of brings you to the next level, and kind of allows you to move on. And that might mean a change in direction, it might mean a change in disposition, it might mean a complete social change, it might mean all the things that you thought you were doing right, you suddenly realise actually that's part of the problem. And that self-transcendence of that deepest point of potential failure. It's almost in a way, it's a bit like acknowledging, we're all failures. Yeah. We are all failures. It's just that some people are very good at making it look like they're not. And then we believe that they're somehow. No, it's just the way that they're positioned on the chessboard or the map or whatever it is. They got the rewards because they were flooded in their direction. It means that they're no more virtuous or intelligent or capable than anybody else. They're just lucky.
Yeah.
And then when you think, okay, well, is luck important to you? And you think, well, yeah, obviously. I keep doing the lottery tickets.
Like you say, it's one of those things that's occurred to me quite a lot. Luck is the most important factor to success, always. I mean, and people as well. I've spoken about this to people, and sometimes there's always like not necessarily a hesitation, but like an aggression and an unwillingness to accept the idea that, sometimes you take two people, both equally as hardworking or as brilliant, and sometimes one will succeed and one will fail. And the only distinguishing factor is luck, is that they're in the right place at the right time, surrounded by the right people.
It's often one of the factors is often agreeableness.
Yeah.
And the extent to which people find somebody agreeable. And I'm not people who know me probably realise.
Very disagreeable.
I am disagreeable. I like a good argument, and I like to say, I'd rather say what I'm thinking than try and figure out what it is that somebody else wants me to say to make them feel better about themselves. And I've never been able to play that game, which is again, one of those things about my disposition is that, okay, I might be smart, I might in capital letters is probably not, but I might be all of these positive things, but I have this thing which people don't. But then again, at some point, disagreeableness is going to be really essential, because when you're trapped and you're in a situation where you can't think out of it because everybody's, you're in a situation where something's failing and everybody says, what do we do?
Yeah.
Well, you need the contrarian to come in at that point and say, well, you stop doing that. And they all get, they take offence and it's terrible, and somebody's, you're just being belligerent or whatever it is. And then actually, no, this is part of a critical thinking process that we shouldn't necessarily all just accept things as they are, but we should be constantly striving to understand it and analyse it and move on from it. But so that comes across as disagreeableness for some reason.
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like it's not that in itself isn't disagreeableness, is it? That's having the language is failing me today. I don't know what words are what, but that's like having the ability to be able to see what's working and just be able to tell people what's not working.
Well, I wish, but if you've got a society which is very codified in terms of its precepts of, for example, any organisation now that is dedicated to its public image and how it looks is failing, because it's not looking at what it does and it's not looking at what difference it makes. So what you tend to do is you tend to employ people who are really good at promoting the idea of the organisation. So you get like-minded people around, and everybody is saying, "Oh, this is really great. This is wonderful. This works." And the person who comes along and says, "No, this doesn't," the Emperor's New Clothes comes along and says, "No, this isn't what is actually happening," puts you on. It puts you out there, I suppose, and it's kind of what you. I don't know. I feel as if sometimes it's like I've got no other option. This is me. Somebody described it as kind of having a conversation with me. Is like Rob's truth bombs. You just drop them. You can't not do it. And it's like, well, that's not my problem.
Yeah.
The problem is everybody else is too cautious, and everybody else is maybe lacks a kind of sense of, do you know what, reality. This isn't good enough, and we need to do something better.
Yeah.
But then again, I'm reflexive enough to know that that just might be a mistaken thing to do in this world.
I don't know. I mean, I think if you're going to engage with people and you're going to honestly engage with these kind of systems, you do have to do it honestly. And you sometimes, the truth that you have to say or from your perspective isn't always going to be agreeable, but that doesn't mean you can't not say it.
It's not to say that you're not being personable and that you're not being nice and that you're not listening to other people's anxieties and concerns. That's not what I mean by disagreeableness.
No, definitely, yeah.
Grouchiness and kind of is not, but it's the idea that you kind of, you do have a baseline of kind of like, values and morals that you kind of want to look at how this is done in a proper way.
Yeah.
And the worst part is to be dogmatic at all, be a pedant about it. There's nothing worse than a virtuous pedant. It's like, you must do it like this for the greater good. One thing that interests me is so your journey from, if you like, kind of what you went through the school system, and then going to university, and what was the kind of framework of expectation that once you passed out of the schooling system that you would then go on and achieve or be part of?
It was a very, very, very naive one. I sort of
on your behalf or their behalf?
No, on my behalf. Because when I was first in college and I realised that what I wanted to do, for sure, was philosophy, I sort of had these very personal, lofty ideas of, I need to study this because it's big and it's important and it's a very, and to this, I still believe this, it's a very privileged discipline in the fact that you learn so much about yourself and the world, and you have all of these big ideas floating around, expanding your consciousness, allowing you to think with more clarity about bigger and bigger things. And I thought, I kind of have to do this for myself. There was never really like an external goal as I was going through philosophy. That sort of developed as I was studying at university. And I said to myself, well, if I'm doing this and I'm doing this for me, what's going to be the end goal when I leave? What am I going to do with my life? Because although I was naive, I wasn't naive enough to believe that I would be simply allowed to drift through life bettering myself, shockingly, without giving anything back. So it sort of became, well, okay, I'm going to do something, I'm going to be a philosopher, I'm going to contribute to this grand tapestry. And then you sort of realise crushingly that academia is not an area that fosters those kinds of ambitions. It's another one of those systems where you show up, you teach students to do the same thing, and you just write paper after paper after paper that I mean, you'll end up writing loads, but the only people that will read them will be other philosophers, and you'll never have any kind of impact on the world whatsoever. So then I thought, well, okay, if I can't do that, and by this point I'm doing my masters, paying less and less attention to my work, because I started to see less and less point in it. At that point, I thought, well, I've got everything that I'm going to get out of this degree, and I let the work slip. I was reading, but I wasn't writing, if you see what I mean. And I thought, okay, well, I'll do something creative. I'll take all of these ideas, and I will, instead of contributing to academia and ideas and thought at large, I'll do the same thing, but creatively, and I'll contribute to culture. And I still want to do that, but it's then after I finished my masters and was no longer being subsidised by the government to be a bum. This sort of harsh economic reality set in when it's like, okay, well, now I'm going to need a job, and it's going to need to be more than a part-time job at McDonald's. And so I thought, well, how do I even do that? I've spent the last 2 years doing nothing but philosophy. I've got no marketable skills, or at least none that are, it's not entirely true, none that are obviously marketable.
Well, you used an interesting phrase earlier about the privilege. You go, university isn't a privilege. It really, I hate this phrase now. It's a necessity.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't...
Those critical thinking skills, the fact that we actually we still believe, or we're still encouraged, both from an economic and from a cultural view, if you like, that somehow those people at university are privileged. Most people I know went through university, if they're pushed properly, it's a hard time.
Yeah.
And it's it's demanding, and you defer any kind of income for many years, and you commit your life to something which goes beyond merely thinking about yourself. But we live in a society which is all about thinking about yourself. So the drift has been towards watering down the university experience and function to turn it into something which merely satisfies those people who are doing it for their economic superiority or status or sense of self. So it's not a privilege. It is an absolute necessity that we have people who are able to critically think through and engage with long-term problems and issues. How that is applied is a different matter. But the fact that we don't respect that, and then you've got the crush, the idea that I wonder if, you're right. You've got to pay the bills and you've got to be pragmatic to a certain extent. But the fact that we live in a society which is so narrowly economically structured around very basic task-driven jobs. Means that anybody who does want to engage with something on a more meaningful, systematic level, i.e. as a kind of philosophical or exercise of examination, is instantly finds themselves without a home.
Well, yeah, this is why I think everybody, and I think they do on very minor, superficial levels, but everybody should have to at some point have a very basic training in things like philosophy, sociology, something that allows you to see the world from something that isn't a perspective that's directly given to you by somebody, so you can enter the workforce and not just become another, and I hate the terminology, but so you can become something that isn't just another drone going through the motions, so you can look at things creatively and reflexively, because ultimately that's how you derive value from the human experience.
Yeah, and the notion of value has become very narrow to economic value.
Yeah, so it's all instrumental value. I remember something that was said to me very early on. I'm pretty sure it was maybe even my first class at university, was as a society we're very good at viewing instrumental value, things that are good because it gets this result. and that's good because it gets this, and you sort of create this chain of value. But what we're not good at is seeing things that are valuable in and of themselves. Something that's valuable simply because it is valuable. And the thing that's always stuck with me is this thing called the ditch digger's lament. Have we ever talked about this before? Where the ditch digger, he digs the ditch to earn the money, to buy the bread, to build the strength, to dig the ditch, and you end up in this cyclical sort of destructive cycle of meaning and value, where everything depends on something else. And as a result,
that describes how I feel at the moment.
Yeah, and as a result, nothing is really valuable, because the value is always deferred to something ahead of itself, and you never really get at the value.
Yeah, it's that you end up in that utilitarian loop of all you're ever looking at is the utility of something.
Yeah,
and never looking at the transcendent value of something.
Exactly, which is why I had an experience with it myself. Maybe a week or so ago. I don't know. Time blurs all together. It's all a puddle. But I was sitting there and I was reading comic books, as I'm prone to do, and I was thinking, why am I reading? Like, what's the point? What am I getting? What am I doing? Like, what is this for? Like, I'm just, I go to work and I work to earn money so I can live, and then I use that money to buy comic books so I can sit there on the weekend or after work and read them. And it's like, well, what comes after this, And it was at that point I realised that, like, nothing comes after this. Nothing should come after this. Nothing should have to come after this. There should be some things in your life that you simply do because they're valuable. And I think, reading and leisure activities are one of those things. You do it because it makes you happy and it allows you to live a good life. But because we live in a world where you're encouraged to monetize everything, nothing can exist independent of that capitalist cycle of contribution back to something else to get money out of it. And so it's almost very alien for a lot of people to sit there and just do something because it's fun, because you enjoy it. I mean, it's like people constantly turning their hobbies into businesses or creating social media accounts so they can one day hopefully make money off of their hobby. But there's also something very dystopian and alarming about having something that's yours and that you care about very deeply and monetizing it, so it is no longer yours, and you depend on it for a living, because then a whole host of stresses become attached to that.
And the only virtue in it is that it's better than the alternative.
Yeah,
which is to live in somebody else's defined world of functionality that you have to do as an employee.
Yeah, but also I can't believe I'm about to sit here and argue for the virtues of capitalism, but there's also something quite freeing about that. The idea that you can, between the hours of 9 and 5, just show up somewhere, and as long as you're allowed to creatively do your job, the same kind of things that we were talking about earlier, working in a system that has some space and reflexivity for you to do what you need to do in both a productive, enjoyable and meaningful way. There's nothing wrong with doing that and giving yourself up to a sort of larger corporate entity, as long as you're given that space. And then at 5 saying, all right, well, I'm done, I'm off the clock now, this is my time, and I'm going to do what I want to do. Thank you.
It's okay. I'll take this away.
Oh, perfect. Cheers.
Thank you. More coffee?
Yeah. Brilliant. That's exactly what I need. Another coffee. Here I am defending capitalism. I've had too much caffeine.
Well, it is. I mean, like anything, there is social processes are neutral. One of the things I learned from Herbert Blumer was that he studied industrialization, and he said there's both good industrialization and there's bad industrialization. There's exploitative industrialization and there's responsible industrialization.
Yeah.
And he said what you've got to look at, and this is one of the things I recoil from with people who particularly using things like discourse analysis, is that there's always capitalism is always bad. Well, that's not the case. Capitalism can be good and is good in some respects, but it's maybe it doesn't feel like that sometimes at the moment. That it feels very, and plus you've got to talk about the right social processes that encapsulate that, and to say that capitalism encapsulates our whole being is reductive or misses the point. But there are elements to it of freedom and disruption and change and renewal, which, if it's managed in the right way, can be very liberating.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like everything, really. It's evil if you make it evil. It is what you make of it.
Yeah, and the evil intent is within the people who use that system. I was chatting to my mum the other day, and she went on my sister went on a train trip, one of these ones where you book a meal and a dining out day, on one of these like Oriental Express type things, but it was from Liverpool to Cardiff. And,
as long as nobody was murdered.
No, well, that would have been fun if it was like somebody dressed as Hercule Poirot comes out. But it was it was really good fun. But one of the things she noted was that they were listening into the people at the next table's conversation, and it was two couples was sat on the 4-seater table, didn't know each other, so they met, and people go on these things so that they can meet people.
Yeah.
And she said all they talked about was what they've got, how many channels they've got on Sky, how many, what car they've got, where they've been on their holiday, and it's and they both my mum and my sister said that it's kind of not anything. My family's not anything special or anything like that, but they both said, "Gosh, that's really sad, isn't it? If that's all you've got to talk about."
Yeah.
And that's the kind of the world that we live in, and it's the options that people, which is where I recoil. Because I don't want to. I do have things, and I do enjoy having certain things, and I would like to have more things, and I would like to enjoy them, but not just for the sake of having them. They've got to have a bit of somehow. They've got to serve a purpose.
Yeah. No, I agree, definitely. Like, I'll spend a lot of money on things, and my room is stuffed to the brim with just crap, but at the end of the day, it needs to be what I'll spend all my money on is art, essentially. It'll be books, it'll be comic books, it'll be films, it'll be music. What I loathe, and I always see them because I'm constantly going into the Forbidden Planet in town, and the comic books are upstairs. And then downstairs, there's all just the plastic collectible tat that serves no purpose other than to collect dust on a shelf somewhere, so you can look at it and go, yeah, I like that thing.
Yeah.
Then there it is on a shelf. I'm fine spending, comic books are expensive. A single issue, 22 pages, is between £3 to £5, but... And you can blast through some of them in 10 minutes. But I'll happily spend the money on those every week because I get to sit down, I get to read it, I get to enjoy something. It's, the creative expression of a team of incredibly talented people contributing something to culture. What I won't do is spend £15 on a bloody Superman plastic Funko Pop that sits on a shelf somewhere.
Dust.
Yeah, because what's the point? You're not gaining anything from it, are you? It's just you own it just to say that you own it.
Well, there is an aesthetic value. Maybe you're
minor
not,
one.
Well, in some circumstances, but there are other. It is nice to have nice things. And there are aesthetic values in terms of, if it was something that's just churned out of a factory. I mean, I've got lots of stuff like this, which is like I regard as a kind of pastiche, rather than as an expression of my sincerity, which is something that we've established that is very difficult for me to express. But I think one of the problems with this is that our culture has become privatised. So as you say, what your culture is defined by, and I'm the same, I've got boxes and boxes of CDs and DVDs and books and things, but I don't go to they're not part of a library. They're not part of, it's difficult to go to museums and art galleries and be part of that process and be part of the development and creative process, because the only option that you've got by and large. Not everybody. I mean, there are people out there who are better than doing this than me, and I never kind of quite learnt it. Who will engage publicly with other people as part of the process of doing these things. And, and Leicester's got some good examples. The Beta X project is a good example of pushing some of the boundaries of that and bringing people together to have that more collectivised social process of sharing work and ideas and things like that. Then there's the Leicester Contemporary Gallery, which is opened up, which is next door to us. There's the Lo-Fi Photography, and there's various other groups that are around. But it's a marginalised experience rather than it being the accepted experience. So I don't wake up on a Saturday morning thinking I'm off to the gallery today because I'm going to have some really great interesting conversations with people, because it doesn't, you've got to go and seek it out, you've got to challenge it here now. It's very kind of low powered aesthetic space to live in.
Well, I hope you woke up this morning thinking, oh gosh, I'm going to go down to the comic book shop, not the comic book shop, the coffee shop, and have some very exciting conversations.
Well, exactly, yeah, and it's kind of, it's that's why I enjoy, these things are quite good for that, because it's, you it is something that it pushes yourself. You have to kind of think. You have to go beyond merely what your mood is. And I'd love to be one of those people who could do a podcast about fluff and nothing and cats I've seen on YouTube. I mean,
or
maybe I should do that.
I was going to say, maybe that could be the next experiment.
Should I lighten up?
Is the next one we'll get together and we won't talk about anything remotely meaningful or deep. We'll just fill it with fluff. It'll be a very pleasant conversation between two people about cats and dogs.
Yeah, I mean, I on the way in, there's on West Coast Drive, there is I'll show you a picture. So this
Not
is...
you, the listener.
This is... there we go, it's the cat that's always sitting on West Coast Drive, which is always very... it looks very kind of grumpy, but it's actually very sweet. And I always enjoy, when it's there. It's like the centre of attention on the street, and it's those kind of little moments that kind of it's a fairly run-down area, the West End of Leicester, and that walk through feels like it's a bit embattled at times. There's the bins all over the place. There's the houses of kind of piles of mattresses outside and that kind of stuff. It's that kind of area, but it's these little things. There's a few cats in the neighbourhood that you can kind of build a relationship with. About them, you'll start looking out for them.
Beacons of joy in the wasteland that is Leicester.
Maybe that should be our new title for the
I like that,
Beacons
actually,
of Joy. It's a good name for a band. It's like and it's where do you, because you can get locked in a cycle, and this is the thing about the digging deep and the character thing. It's like all of a sudden you can hit on something which does that joyful moment kind of comes through, and it turns people around. But it's not organised, it's spontaneous. It's not planned for. It's not, hey, I'm gonna entertain you. I mean, some people do this really well. Kind of the kind of entertainment type stuff. But
some people have got it down to a fine art.
I'd love to be able to do it. I'd be rich if I could do it. But
we all would.
Yeah.
I think that'd be a great idea, actually, just honing. Maybe we should take this podcast on the road, Rob, and start entertaining people in vast stadiums whilst we sit there chatting absolute waffle.
Well, other people seem to do it, and celebrity. But then again, that's not what I think. I don't do it for that. I don't do it. If I do it because it's helpful for me, and hopefully helpful for you, or whoever else is contributing to this. If I had to think about what the audience were thinking about, those unknown listeners,
the proles,
the mannequins in the audience, it's like you kind of have to, what can you do? You just have to put yourself out there. nobody's listening. I still get something from it which is of value. I hope other people who take part in them get something of value. And then you're trying to find that thing which you're right, which is the thing which kind of generates the spark, which kind of pushes it forward, which transforms it into something which is less miserable. Well, no, there's nothing wrong with being miserable.
No, there are some many virtues in being a miserable git. That's true. But I mean, this podcast itself it's become a lot more cheerful as we've been sat here for an hour. But I think that might be the caffeine.
It could be the caffeine.
Yeah,
it's always something that propels forward.
It'll be interesting to listen back to and to slowly hear us get happier.
Well, yeah. I mean, and over time, these things develop. I mean, there's a lot of things going on in the world at the moment which are very challenging,
to say the least. Yeah.
And then where do you find that moment of joy and happiness that kind of allows you to kind of just go, okay, it's like take a pause, take a moment.
Yeah.
I'm not against that. I think is a really important, and if you've got the skill to be able to do that with other people, that's really important. That kind of not entertainment for entertainment's sake, but entertainment for relief.
Yeah.
The comedian. This is the cynicism of modern comedy. Maybe we could talk about this one day. Is very, very destructive. Kind of people saying things and the stuff that's happened. In the last few weeks in terms of public entertainment and stuff like that is very, very destructive. But when you're in a room and you provide you have a collective cathartic experience listening to some jokes. And I'm of the kind of Tom O'Connor variety of comedy. That's my level. I'm not.
God, I don't even know who that is.
He's famous Liverpool comedian from the 70s and 80s.
Oh, well, TV. Yeah, before
but
I was
jokes,
even born.
But it was kind of jokes, not not kind of pushing people's buttons. Not But that moment, that collective catharsis moment of kind of looking at a situation and turning it around because somebody's helped you to re-understand it from a different perspective is really, it's not something I could do. But
because comedy can be and is a lot of the time very cynical and almost aggressive, to the point where it is no longer cathartic. You laugh, but oftentimes you sort of just feel, I don't know, it's mean-spirited. You leave feeling very angry, and there's nothing wrong with occasionally being mean-spirited if it's well-placed and well-directed. But also, like you say, there should be a cathartic element to comedy. That laughter, that release of emotion.
You can't get away with just saying it's ironic all the time.
No.
I'm being ironic. It's like, it's
irony and cynicism has absolutely ruined popular culture.
Right. I think that's that's a good point for us to pause and regroup in a couple, maybe a week or two's time, and we'll carry on with this conversation, and maybe we'll adopt some themes and kind of go into some more things in specific things about popular culture, maybe. Beyond the comic book, and into whatever is of interest at that moment. So what's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
On Twitter, at Clayton Comics, and I won't say it, but there's an X at the end.
There's an X at the end. And I'm Rob Watson, and you can contact me on Rob W Media on Twitter and Instagram. And until next time, thanks very much. You've been listening to Distraction Therapy with me, Rob Watson. Find out more at robwatsonmedia.net or follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Rob W Media.